"I think, upon reflection, that we should not suit," Mr. Bram Colville said in the crowded drawing-room of Lanmore House, loudly enough for the assembled guests to hear, "and I have accepted Miss Thorncastle instead. She brings £12,000, you understand. You bring. You will forgive me for being frank." The Duke of Lanmore, standing near the window with a glass he had not touched, watched the young woman receive this in the centre of his own drawing-room, before 30 staring faces, and did not at first understand why the sight of it should trouble him so entirely. Her name was Clarissa Vane. She was a distant connection of his late mother's, come to stay a fortnight, and no, his name was not Julian. His name was Everard, Duke of Lanmore, and he had scarcely spoken to her in the 3 days she had been under his roof. Being a man much occupied with the estate and little given to the society of young ladies, he knew only that she was to be married soon to Colville, a shallow, handsome, ambitious young man of no particular fortune, and that the match had been got up by her family in the flush of Colville's earlier attentions. He had thought nothing of it. He thought of very little these days that did not concern the drains and the timber and the endless business of a great estate. He had buried his own heart a long time ago, with a wife dead 5 years and a grief he had folded away and did not examine. But now Bram Colville was jilting Clarissa Vane in his drawing-room, publicly, cruelly, choosing £12,000 over her before the whole assembly, plainly enjoying the little sensation of it, and Everard found that his hand had closed hard around the stem of his glass. He waited for her to weep. That was what they did, the young ladies. He had seen it. He waited for the flood, the collapse, the scene that would let everyone in the room feel comfortably sorry and comfortably superior. It did not come. Clarissa Vane stood very still in the centre of the drawing-room. The colour drained from her face and then, deliberately, returned to it. And she looked at Bram Colville, at the man who had courted her and won her, and now discarded her for a richer purse before an audience, with an expression of such perfect, quiet composure that Everard felt it across the length of the room like a change in the weather. "I understand you completely, Mr. Colville," she said. Her voice did not shake. It was low and even and entirely without appeal. "You have been frank, and I thank you for it has saved me from a very great mistake. I wish you and Miss Thorncastle's £12,000 every happiness. I am sure you will suit each other admirably." And then she did the one thing Everard had not braced for. She did not argue, or plead, or make him small in return. She simply inclined her head to the room at large, a small dignified bow, as though thanking them for their hospitality. And she turned, and she walked out of the drawing-room, unhurried, straight-backed, her chin level, leaving 30 people and a jilting fiancé staring at the empty doorway where a woman had just refused, utterly, to be broken in public. The room burst at once into scandalized murmur. Colville, robbed of his scene, looked faintly foolish. Miss Thorncastle looked uncertain. And Everard, Duke of Lanmore, set down his untouched glass and found that his heart, that old folded-away thing he had been so sure was finished, was beating hard against his ribs for the first time in 5 years. He went out after her. He did not decide to. He found himself already moving. Out through the hall, out to the great doors, in time to see her small figure going down the long gravel drive in the grey afternoon, her single trunk being carried behind her by a footman. She had evidently summoned with perfect composure the instant she left the room. She had ordered her own departure. She was not fleeing. She was leaving on her own terms, with her dignity gathered around her like a cloak, and she was not looking back. Everard stood on his own steps and watched her go, and understood with the sudden clarity of a man waking from a long sleep that he could not let her walk out of his gates and out of his life having exchanged perhaps 40 words with him. That the thing he had felt watching her hold her head level in that cruel room was not pity at all. That it was, God help him, the first true feeling of any kind he had permitted himself in 5 years, and that if he let her disappear down that grey road he would spend the rest of his life wondering. "My carriage," he said to the nearest servant in a voice that brought the man running. At once. Now. She had reached the gates and turned onto the country road, walking now while her trunk followed in a hired cart, when she heard the horses behind her, the fast urgent beat of a fine team driven hard, and stepped aside to let the carriage pass. It did not pass. It drew up alongside her, gravel scattering, and the door opened, and the Duke of Lanmore himself put his head out, bareheaded, without his hat, having plainly come after her the moment she left. "Miss Vane," he said, "please, a word." Clarissa looked at him with the same still composure she had turned on Colville, though her eyes were wary. "Your Grace is very good to see me off. There was no need. I am quite well, as you observe. I have only lost a man who preferred £12,000 to my company, which is, upon reflection, a very cheap price and a lucky escape." "You have lost nothing of any value," Everard said. "The value is all on your side, and he was fool enough not to see it. Miss Vane, Clarissa, will you not come back to the house? You cannot walk to the coaching inn. Let me at least carry you there in some comfort." "I would rather walk," she said, gently but firmly, "than sit in a fine carriage feeling grateful, Your Grace. I have had quite enough today of being an object of pity in your drawing-room. I do not wish to be one in your carriage as well. I mean no discourtesy, but I would rather keep my own feet under me just now. You understand." And Everard, hearing this, understood a great deal, understood that she had been pitied and paraded and discarded, and had held her head up through all of it, and that the last thing on earth she would accept was to be rescued like a dropped handkerchief. He did the only thing that seemed possible. He opened the carriage door wider and climbed down into the road beside her. "Then I shall walk too," he said. She stared at him. "Your Grace cannot walk to the coaching inn. It is 4 miles. It is beginning to rain." "It is," he agreed. "I shall be very wet. But find I cannot let you go without saying a thing I ought to have said in that room, and I could not say it while shouting up at you from a carriage window, like a coachman. So I shall walk and be wet and say it properly, and if at the end of 4 miles you still wish nothing to do with me, I shall put you on the coach with my blessing and trouble you no further. Is that a fair bargain?" The rain came down soft and grey around them. Clarissa's composure wavered for the first time, not into weeping, but into a kind of bewildered wariness, as though the world had stopped behaving as she expected. "You do not even know me," she said. "You have scarcely spoken to me in 3 days." "I know," Everard said, and they began to walk side by side along the wet country road, the carriage rolling slowly behind them. "That is my great fault, and I mean to mend it. I have not spoken to you or to anyone much in 5 years. My wife died, Miss Vane, and I folded up my heart and put it away and told myself I was better off without the use of it. I have been a cold and absent man in my own house. I have let 3 days pass with a woman of more courage and more grace than anyone I have known, and never troubled to learn a single thing about her, because I had stopped troubling to learn anything about anyone." He drew a breath. "And then I watched that shallow fool humiliate you before 30 people, and I watched you refuse to break, and I watched you walk out of my drawing-room with more dignity than the whole of my company put together, and something in me that has been asleep for 5 years woke up. That is what I could not say through a carriage window. That is what I have walked out into the rain to tell you. You woke something in me I had given up for dead." Clarissa walked in silence for a while, the rain darkening her bonnet, her profile still and thoughtful. "I do not know what to do with that, Your Grace," she said at last, honestly. "An hour ago I was engaged to be married. Now I am jilted and walking in the rain, and a duke is telling me I have woken his heart. It is a great deal for one afternoon." "It is," he agreed. "I do not ask you to answer it today. I do not ask you to answer it this month. I only ask, do not get on the coach. Come back to the house, not as an object of anyone's pity. As my guest, in your own right, for as long as you please, so that I might do the thing I ought to have done at the first, learn who you are. And if, when you know me a little, you find me as tiresome as I have lately been, I shall drive you to the coach myself and wish you joy. But give me the chance, Clarissa. I have been given very few second chances in my life, and I did not deserve any of them, and I am asking you for one now." They had reached a milestone at the edge of the road, wet and grey. Clarissa stopped beside it and turned to look at him, the Duke of Lanmore. Hateless and soaked through, having walked a mile in the rain to ask a jilted woman not to leave, and Everard held his breath and let her see the whole of it in his face, the awakened heart, the plain unpractised hope, the man he had stopped being and might, with her, become again. "You are very wet, Your Grace," she said, and there was at last the faintest unsteady warmth at the corner of her mouth. "I am." And you will catch your death out here, and then I shall be blamed for the death of a duke, which is a great deal worse than being jilted. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. Very well, I will come back to the house, not because you are a duke, because you walked into the rain, and because in 3 days under your roof I had thought you the coldest man I ever met, and I find I was wrong, and I have a great weakness for being wrong about people. It gives me hope for the rest of us. Everard laughed a real laugh, rusty from disuse, and handed her up into the carriage and climbed in after her, both of them dripping and disreputable and, for the first time in the whole grey afternoon, entirely at ease. She stayed a fortnight, and then she stayed a month, and somewhere in the middle of it the fortnight had become something no one troubled to number any longer. Everard learned who she was, learned that she read history for pleasure and rode better than half his grooms and had a dry, quiet wit that undid him a little more each day. He learned that the composure he had admired in the drawing-room was not coldness but courage hard won, a woman who had decided long ago that no one would ever again have the pleasure of watching her break, and he set himself, gently, patiently, to be the one person she need never be composed for. Bram Corval married his £12,000 and was, by every account, thoroughly miserable within the year, which surprised no one and pleased Everard rather more than was strictly charitable. Miss Thorncastle's fortune, it was found, came with a great many strings and a very disagreeable mother, and Corval had leisure to reflect at length upon the woman he had discarded in a duke's drawing-room and the duke who had walked into the rain to keep her. Everard proposed at the same milestone at the edge of the road on a fine dry day this time, having walked her out to it on purpose. "I have brought you back to where I asked you not to leave," he said. "It seemed the right place to ask you to stay for good. I have loved you, I think, since you walked out of my drawing-room and made me run after you like a boy. Marry me, Clarissa. Not because I am a duke, you have never once cared for that, but because I am a man who was dead 5 years and woke up the day you refused to be broken. Stay. Be the Duchess of Lanmore and the mistress of my heart, and the one person in the world I need never pretend for." And Clarissa Vane, who had walked away in dignified silence from the man who scorned her, and been pursued through the rain by the one who saw her, put her hand in his and said yes. Not weeping, not pitied, not rescued, but choosing freely and gladly the second chance they had both, against all likelihood, been given. They were married at the little church past the milestone, and every year on the anniversary of the day he had come after her. The Duke of Lanmore walked his wife out that wet grey stretch of road, rain or shine, though he always rather hoped for rain, to remember the afternoon he had thrown away his hat and his pride and gone running after the only woman who had ever been brave enough to walk away from him first.